Good afternoon and welcome to this web event from the American Enterprise Institute, where today we'll be discussing school cell phone bans. I'm Robert Pondicio, a senior fellow in K-12 education studies here at AEI and an affiliate of the James Q. Wilson program in education policy studies. In the past 2 years, more than 30 states have passed laws restricting cell phones in schools, beginning with Florida in 2023. These cell phone bans arose in part because of concerns over youth mental health. But there were also academic reasons, with teachers reporting that cell phones had become a constant distraction in class. Marty West, one of our panelists today, recently published an article on that topic in Education Week. It was titled, "Student Test Scores Keep Falling. What's Really to Blame?" Marty will kick us off today with a presentation making the case that smartphones and social media are the most likely culprit for declining NAEP scores over the past 15 years. We'll then open it up to our full panel featuring Ginny Gentles of the Education Freedom Center at the Defense of Freedom Institute for Policy Studies, and Alex Barron, the principal of E.L. Haynes Public Charter School here in Washington, D.C., to discuss cell phone bans, including the policy landscape, the ins and outs of enforcing these bans, the effects on students and teachers so far, and whether cell phone bans go far enough. Then we'll turn to your questions. You can submit those in advance to Greg.Fournier at aei.org or on X at hashtag AEI cellphone bans. We'll meet Ginny and Alex shortly, but to begin today's event, let me introduce you to Marty West. He is Academic Dean and the Henry Lee Shattuck Professor of Education at Harvard University and Editor-in-Chief of Education Next. His research focuses on education policy, school reform, and the political and social factors shaping academic outcomes. West served as Deputy Director of the Harvard Kennedy School's Program on Education Policy and Governance, and he's advised policymakers at both state and federal levels. As I mentioned a moment ago, his recent Ed Week essay, "Student Test Scores Keep Falling. What's Really to Blame?" explores the hypothesis that widespread smartphone use has profoundly disrupted students' attention, motivation, and learning. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Marty West.
Robert, thanks so much for that introduction, for the opportunity to be with you all today. I'm really looking forward to the conversation with Ginny and Alex and you. I wear a variety of hats in the education sector, as you mentioned, and I'm really thinking of three of them in particular. And today, I serve as vice chair of the National Assessment Governing Board, which oversees the nation's report card. And it's in that context I began to think a lot about these issues of what we can and can't say based on the recent trends that we've seen. I'm also a researcher at the Harvard Graduate School of Education. And finally, I'm a parent of three boys aged 18, 15, and 4. And yes, you did hear that right. And so I think about these issues in the present and in the future as they affect American students. So can you all see my slides? So are cell phones in schools to blame for poor academic outcomes? That's the title of our session. And I want to answer that question with a qualified yes. And that yes is qualified in two ways. One, it's because when we have major trends and social indicators in a large nation like the United States, I think it's rarely that there would be only one factor that is solely responsible for indicators moving in the wrong direction. Secondly, I want to acknowledge that the evidence that we have at this point is largely circumstantial rather than direct. Nonetheless, I think it's a strong enough case, the evidence is strong enough that it justifies experimentation with new measures to restrict student access to cell phones in schools and perhaps beyond on the precautionary principle alone. So as I said, I got interested in these issues in trying to understand recent trends on the National Assessment of Educational Progress, often referred to as the nation's report card. This is a test administered by the federal government that is the only test that is both nationally representative and comparable both across space from state to state and over time. And this is really our best indicator for tracking whether, broadly speaking, American students' knowledge and skills in core academic subjects are moving in the right direction. It's administered every 2 years to 4th and 8th graders nationwide and in every state. And that's the largest sample, the best information that we get out of this testing program. It's also administered to 8th and 12th graders at the national level in other subjects beyond reading and math, like science, US history and civics, uh, and the like. Um, so for the past 5 years, every time there's been a new release of data from the nation's report card, the big question that everyone's asked is, have kids recovered from the pandemic? And it is the case that there were important disruptions to the American education system over the course of the pandemic. And but I'm increasingly convinced, let me see if I can get that right. There you go. I'm increasingly convinced that this pandemic centric lens on US students' achievement that has become so dominant obscures as much as it reveals. And that's because when it comes to trends in American students' knowledge and skills, our problems really predate the pandemic. So here's one of those four key subject grade combinations that the nation's report card looks at: reading, grade 4. And I suspect if you were shown this data series and you had no prior knowledge of when a major disruption to American education like the pandemic occurred, you would be hard pressed to identify where exactly it showed up, between the 2019 and 2022 administrations. You might be tempted to guess that something happened there in the late 1990s, where there was a bit of a dip for one cycle of testing. But really, what it looks like is that achievement peaked around 2015 and has been falling linearly since that time. There's no obvious change in trajectory with the pandemic. And if we look at reading in grade 8, we see essentially the same pattern. In this case, the peak actually occurred as early as 2013, and things have been shifting in the wrong direction since that time. If we go to math, you see clearer evidence that there was a sort of disruption to progress when the pandemic occurred as a result of school closures. But in the long run, achievement again peaked in 2013 and has been trending in the wrong direction since that time. Similar story for math and grade 8. Um, so if we just talk about average scores on the National Assessment of Educational Progress, they've been trending in the wrong direction since somewhere between 2013 and 2017, depending on the grade and the subject that we're looking at. I think the picture gets even more troubling in terms of how concerned we should be about this trend if we start looking beyond average test scores to what's going on among different student groups and at different points in the achievement distribution. So here you see scores reported for each of 5 percentile levels: the 10th percentile, the 25th percentile, low scoring students, that is, then students at the median, very similar to the mean scores that you just saw in the prior slides, and then our higher scoring students at the 75th and the 90th percentile. This is reading in grade 8. And what you can see is that you see that decline in average scores tracked there in the middle of the figure. But if you look to the far left, you see that at the 10th percentile, student performance has been falling more steeply, and it started earlier. Then if you look at the highest end of the achievement distribution, you see that our students at the 90th percentile, despite the disruption of the pandemic, are performing as high as ever. The same is true if we go to math in grade 8 again as well. You see the bottom really falling out for our lowest scoring students, and then students at the top end of the distribution doing about as well as ever. And this means that there's a larger and larger share of students at the bottom end of the achievement distribution who are failing even to achieve the level of performance on these exams that is considered to demonstrate basic proficiency with the content that they cover. So I think this should be is a really troubling concern. So what's going on? Well, I go into this in much greater depth in the essay that Robert referred to, but in a nutshell, candidate explanations to explain these trends should have emerged in the early 2010s. They should disproportionately affect low scoring students. They should affect learning across multiple subjects, including science, civics, and US history, where we see exactly the same patterns. It shouldn't be something that is about a particular curricular or pedagogical approach in, say, math specifically. It should affect learning in essentially all states. This trend has been geographically very pervasive. And because trends in test scores in other developed countries are trending in the wrong direction, I think we should be on the lookout for explanations that transcend national boundaries. And as I look across the range of candidate explanations, really the emergence of smartphones, of social media targeting youth, and the rise of what I think of as screen based schooling, that's the only set of explanations that checks all those boxes. As I said, we should be skeptical of monocausal theories. There are probably lots of other things going on, and we can talk about how what those could be. But I think the the evidence increasingly points to phones and technology as a big part of the problem. Um, Part of that's just because it's really affecting how people spend their time, and the timing for when this emerged as a trend definitely fits in terms of increasing rapidly in the early 2010s. Here you see indicators of the amount of time a day students spend online. And what is that online activity displacing? Well, to a large extent, it's displacing reading activity. On the right hand of this slide, you see several indicators of students, the frequency with which they read for pleasure outside of school. The only one that's moving in an upward direction is the share of students reporting that they did not read any books for pleasure in the last year, up to now more than a third of students as of the end of the last decade. These were high school seniors on the right. On the left-hand side, that is 8th and 10th graders. As Robert said, states have been responding to these developments, to the emergence of this type of evidence, as well as people's other concerns about anxiety and mental health. Here you see the red states are those states, again, not politically red here, red on the indicator, are those states which are both blue and red politically, and that have adopted school day bans. There are another set of states in orange that have banned use of cell phones during instructional time, and then other states in tan that require local districts to have a policy in place, but have not issued any type of ban statewide. And then there are a handful of outliers that have not taken action as yet. I'm sympathetic with this effort. And as I say at the top of this slide, I think recent evidence on at least very strong cell phone bans is encouraging. But I think as we make this claim, we have to acknowledge that there are very few credible causal studies of the effects of in-school cell phone bans on student outcomes, and that those that do exist vary in their findings, including several that do have null findings showing no clear benefits from adopting the policy. This is a hard question to study. The challenges include the fact that we are not assigning cell phone bans to schools randomly to make life easy for researchers like me. We have a wide variation of approaches that are being implemented in terms of what actually goes on in schools. And then in many cases, I think we have studies with a lack of a true control or comparison group, because many schools, even if they're not required to do so at this point, are undertaking various activities to try to curb the influence of phones. I will say there are two very recent large-scale studies that seem to show more positive results. Angela Duckworth, a psychologist at the University of Pennsylvania, has been leading a team on what's called the Phones in Focus study. And she was out this week saying, at least as judged by teacher satisfaction and teacher reports of student engagement levels, that the more restrictive the policy in place, the better the outcome. Unfortunately, the less restrictive policies seem to be more common than the more restrictive policies at this point. But descriptively, that's what she's seeing in teacher survey data from around the nation. And then a brand new study out just this morning from the National Bureau of Economic Research looked statewide at Florida with very detailed data from students' actual cell phone use in schools in order to be able to understand where bans were in place. It did find improvements in student test scores beginning the second year after a ban was implemented. Again, this is a question we still have a lot more to learn about, and we'll be learning a lot more from ongoing research from Phones in Focus, as well as a new project started by my colleagues at Harvard Center for Education Policy Research, partnering with states to provide new evidence. So I think there's a lot we'll learn in the year. I think the coming years. I think the question I'd want to leave you all with is, as I think about this at this stage, uh, my question is less whether cell phone bans in schools are a good idea in and of themselves, and more about whether bans in schools are a comprehensive enough response to the various ways in which technology may be interfering with and distracting from student learning. And here I want to share an experience that I had with my 15-year-old, my middle boy. Yesterday, we were driving home from a wrestling tournament up in Vermont, and he was trying to do his honors pre-calculus homework. And the textbook he had been instructed not to buy this year. I think this was an effort to save all families some money, but instead it was posted as PDFs that he was now accessing on his phone. He had his computer open to be able to see the problems that he was had been assigned. He had his graphing calculator open so that he could work from that. He was doing his homework actually on paper, but when we got home, he had to transfer it back online in order to put it into his portal. And it just did not strike me as the optimal environment for learning. And so I think we may need to think beyond just cell phones in schools to what I referred to a moment ago as the advent of screen-based schooling, where this is how students are spending the most time interacting with the content that we want them to master and learn. So again, thank you for the invitation to be here, and I really look forward to the conversation.
Marty, before we throw it open, I've just got one or two questions I'd like to ask about your presentation. The 10th percentile data is just sobering, even devastating, especially, those of us who spent our careers working with struggling students. I wonder if you have some thoughts or a theory. Who are these students? What do we know about that particular subgroup's phone and social media use? And by contrast, what is helping? I don't want to overstate the case, but if the 90th percentile students or the 75th percentile students seem to be less susceptible to these issues, what do we know about the difference?
Yeah, so a couple of thoughts here. One is that this has not been a period, this, say, 8 to 10 years, where we've had stagnation or declines at the middle, but things really falling out at the bottom. This has not been a period where we've consistently seen widenings of gaps related to socioeconomic status or race or ethnicity, the sort of achievement gaps we talk about more commonly. And so rather what seems to be happening is low scorers and high scorers are pulling away from each other within those groups. So that is one sort of initial clue. The students at the bottom of the distribution, there are a larger share of students with disabilities and English language learners. But and if you look at data on how much time students spend on phones, on social media, there is a gradient with respect to economic disadvantage, with less advantaged students spending more time online. So that could be part of an explanation, but again, doesn't fit with the exact patterns that we're seeing. So my hypothesis would be that it has to do with students' conscientiousness or their ability to regulate their behavior to avoid distraction. That's something that we know supports the achievement, the success of high scoring students. And it's something that I think make them probably more successful than their low scoring counterparts at maintaining attention in an environment with a lot of distraction.
Okay. Thanks. Okay, let's broaden the lens and involve our two discussants this afternoon. Let's meet them now. Virginia, or Ginny Gentles, is the director of the Education Freedom Center at the Defense of Freedom Institute for Policy Studies. Her work focuses on parental rights, education choice, and policies that empower families. Gentles previously served as a senior political appointee in the U.S. Department of Education and led Florida's Office of Independent Education and Parental Choice. She writes frequently on the intersection of technology, education, and family autonomy. Also with us this afternoon, Alex Barron. He is the principal of the E.L. Haynes Public Charter School in Washington, D.C., a public middle school serving a diverse student body. He's led efforts to strengthen school culture, academic rigor, and social and emotional learning while implementing policies designed to balance technology's benefits and distractions. Under Alex's leadership, E.L. Haynes has piloted new guidelines on student phone use to improve focus, engagement, and peer relationships. So, Alex, let's start with you. As a school leader, what specific phone or challenges do phones present? Distraction, conflict, anxiety, something else?
Yeah, thanks for asking and thanks for the presentation, Marty. I just want to double down on what Marty said about the pandemic being sort of a false signal of all of our educational issues. And I think to answer your question, Robert, one thing that has come out of the pandemic is chronic absenteeism and rises in chronic absenteeism. What cell phones present is that when phones are present in school, students can be physically present but cognitively absent. They can be sitting in classrooms and just fully focused on anything but the lesson, which completely undercuts their ability to learn. And the mechanism behind that, to connect to what Marty was saying, is that attention and focus is a prerequisite for any learning. And reading complex texts is a very cognitively complex endeavor. And phones completely change the way that kids focus and that their mind works more broadly. Um, Aristotle said that the roots of education are bitter, but the fruit is sweet. And I think what we're observing in classrooms is students, through their phone usage, are much more acclimated to instant gratification and learning things that they exactly have been customized to see and experience on their phone. So then in school, when they have to read All Quiet on the Western Front, that requires such a depth of focus that they just don't have that skill set anymore because it's been so attenuated or withered by constant phone use both in and out of school. I'd close by saying we have eliminated phone use in our school, but that doesn't protect for the phone usage outside of school or the impact of family members' phone usage even on students' ability to focus. Even having kids completing homework has been challenged by the fact that parents might be less likely to support kids doing homework because they themselves might be on their phone and they themselves might have less attention. So there's a whole cascade of implications here, but the center of it is that focus and distraction are so powerful now that it is difficult to engage in the discipline necessary to learn complex material.
Alex, was there a moment in your school where there was a consensus, like this is just what we need to do, and how did you roll it out? Was it? I'm guessing. Let me make a guess. Popular with teachers, less so with students and families.
That's right. That's exactly right. The moment this is my first year as a principal. Um, 2 years ago, they instituted the ban, but the ban was implemented by the teachers. So the teachers had to collect student phones when students arrived in their class. And what I would say is that then that puts the teacher in a really difficult position to have to take a child's most valued and prized object from them right in the beginning of class. And especially for a new teacher in the beginning of the year, when you're trying to form a relationship, that is a tough way to start. You walk into my class, I say, "Hi, nice to meet you, Robert. Give me your phone." And it's just a tough way to start. And so what we've shifted this year is right when students enter the school. Students submit their phones to an administrator, and we have a metal detector, which ironically had been instituted for weapons abatement, and all secondary schools in Washington, D.C. pretty much have them. And now the primary function of that metal detector has actually been phone identification rather than weapons. And because a kid comes in and we can see immediately, do they have their phone? And they turn it right in the beginning of the day, which means the teachers no longer have to collect it. So to summarize, yes, teachers were fully on board. We weren't seeing academic gains. The research was becoming clearer. So everyone rallied and said we need to make a shift to phone collection, but we've now reached the most strict form of phone collection where there's no way to circumvent the policy for students.
Well, as a former fifth grade teacher, thank you for not making the teachers the bad guy. I think that's that's enlightening
Definitely.
on your part. Ginny, from a parental rights perspective, who should set the boundaries here? Should it be schools? Should it be families?
I think both should be setting rules and boundaries. So, of course, a school has the role of setting rules that foster a healthy learning environment. And of course, parents should set boundaries and expectations for high risk situations, which I would say include using smartphones. So, definitely both. I see this as really similar to other discipline and boundary issues like dress codes or school arrival or school attendance. Expectations for completing assignments, like the school sets the rule, the expectation, and the parents ensure that the children are following those rules. And given the evidence of harm when it comes to smartphones, when it comes to mental health, access to porn, online gambling, social media during the school day, learning outcomes plummeting, yes, before, but certainly since COVID, we can all know that smartphones are a problem in school. So both schools and parents need to be involved in this.
But as a parental rights advocate, I'm sure, or maybe I shouldn't assume, but I'm of the mind that you are hearing a very different view of this from folks in the parental rights community, right?
I hear some noise from some parents. So I would say, like, eyes on the prize, everyone. When we're talking about concerns about parental rights, we're talking about schools that are actively hiding secrets or secretly transitioning children. We're talking about advocating for academic transparency, access to curriculum and lessons. We're not talking about things that are just appropriate roles for schools, again, like dress codes, like arrival time, and like smartphone use. And I think parents do really want to be supportive of teachers. So to Alex's point that having a cell phone ban, having a way for the day policy takes the pressure off of teachers to police. It gives them more time to instruct rather than constantly be monitoring students' phones and putting them in that adversarial relationship with students. So parents broadly would be supportive if that's communicated to them. You're helping the teacher, and here's how. But there are concerns from parents on communication. I think initially it was shocking to parents in places with cell phone bans, with away for the day policies that they couldn't reach their child at every moment. But just because they've developed kind of a bad habit doesn't mean that it has to be a permanent condition. You don't have to reach your child at every moment. Like, you can break that bad habit of feeling like that's necessary, and you can go back the way it's always been, which is that you can leave a message with the front office. Your child, if it's an emergency, can go to the front office and use the phone. I'm giving these examples because my own children have done this when necessary. And you know, high school students can communicate with the parents through email if it's needed. And if the concern is on like pickup time changing, well, they can turn on their phone at the end of the day and find out that mom might be late. That happened to my daughter last week and she survived. The other issue, and I don't know if this is parental rights, this is just general like concerns about safety. Those were some of the early concerns that were expressed, that parents might be concerned about that, or parents perhaps did express concern. But it's been made very clear that if there is an awful situation happening, like a school shooting, that the students need to be off their phone, focused on what the first responders, what the school staff are instructing them to do to keep them safe, and not jamming up phone lines in that emergency. So those communication concerns, those safety concerns, they need to be addressed when these policies are being rolled out, but they should not be used as an excuse to not enforce these policies.
Yeah, I am by a wide margin the oldest person on this webinar, so I can remember quite clearly that if mom and dad were trying to reach me during the school day, or heavens forbid showed up at the office looking for me, it was not good. So yeah, it's having a flashback. Hey, and can we dig in a little bit on the question that Marty posed to all of us at the end of his presentation about whether this is comprehensive enough? Man, there's so much going on with screen-based education right now, not just on cell phones, but Chromebooks and AI and whatnot. Let's take his question earnestly. Alex, is the cell phone ban comprehensive enough, or do we need to rethink screens more broadly?
Yes, like many issues in education, I think we falsely thought we would get rid of the phones and that student learning would surge back to where we'd seen it in the past. And unfortunately, last year, even though the phone ban was in place, our end of year results hadn't changed nearly as much as we thought. They hadn't changed really at all. And so I don't think that in and of itself, the cell phone ban will lead to the results we want. I do think more comprehensively, Marty talked about his son in the car with the laptop and the PDFs and things like that. And I think, to me, something that I would really push schools to do is to be wary of what one might call multifunctional devices. The word phone is immensely misleading. Telephone means sound across distance. Um, the phone function is maybe the 11th or 12th most commonly used app on the device that we now call a phone. It barely refers to what a phone actually does. It really is a full computer and is full of that distraction. And so a book is more of a monofunctional device, or a textbook or something like that. It enables students, again, to fully focus on the thing that they are doing that's in front of them. Whereas when we assign work on Chromebooks, those Chromebooks have so many features on them that when you ask a student, hey, work on this online website or read online, this paper, this text, they might do it, but they might have another site open in the background, or they are thinking about opening another site. And that really pulls away their attention in a way that just totally undercuts reading. If we want to read, you have to have sustained attention on one thing over time. And I find that many Chromebooks or other multifunctional technology devices just do not promote that focus.
Ginny, what do you think?
Oh, I've strongly opposed this one-to-one device obsession that we have in education right now since COVID, and since that 190 billion in emergency federal funding flowed from the federal government to states and districts. I believe it's over 90% of schools have one-to-one devices, meaning Chromebooks, laptops, iPads, and those students are distracted by all those apps that Alex mentioned. They're distracted by shopping on Amazon when they're pretending to take notes. Apparently, they're opening up Google Docs and communicating with each other on Google Docs instead of texting each other now, which, okay, like students are always going to do something like that. But like, let's not pretend that putting a cell phone away does the job. We've got to really address why there are so many devices in our classrooms and just how distracting those are. And I think we all probably have examples of how problematic this is. The residentially assigned school that my kids would go to if they weren't in the Catholic school, at their back to school night this fall, the English teacher told parents, I don't assign books anymore because I know that the students won't read them. And I live in one of the super zips in Northern Virginia with a bunch of highly educated and fairly well-to-do families living in North Arlington. And their kids cannot focus on reading a novel. Like we've got a problem with devices, with kids being able to focus, and we need to address this beyond just a cell phone ban during the school day.
Robert, can I jump in on point
Please, I was just going to ask you to answer your own question. Yeah.
Well, I actually want to chime in with a hopeful note. So, Ginny, you just said kids can't sustain their attention to read a novel, and there has been, some speculation that maybe the constant use of devices has rewired kids' brains in a way that actually really means that they can't sustain their attention. For Education Next recently, we had Dan Willingham, a very accomplished cognitive scientist, sort of look into the evidence on that point. And his conclusion was that a lot of people have been looking for this, but any effects in terms of affecting kids' ability to sustain attention are very small, and really, yet kids are not sustaining their attention. That means it's about the environment that they're in rather than their ability to do so, and whether they want to sustain attention on a text in the way that Alex was talking about, when they know one click away is another source of entertainment. And so I think it really is about changing the environment. So that is within our power to do as educators and as parents.
Wait, Marty, I'm confused, and forgive me. Even though I'm a huge fan of Dan Willingham, I don't think I saw that piece in EdNext. Was he saying the evidence does not support the idea that devices have shortened attention?
That's right. He was saying that the evidence does not support that idea.
That is beyond counterintuitive. This feels like one of those things that we all know, but it's not true.
Well, we all know what people do, and they sustain attention less because they're constantly distracted. If you put them in an environment where that distraction is not there, their ability, the underlying ability to sustain attention, has not been significantly changed, or at least we don't have good evidence that that's the case.
Okay, Alex, you're nodding, but didn't you say a few moments ago that one of the reasons the teachers wanted the ban was to help restore students' attention?
Yes, sorry, I was nodding. Go ahead, Marty.
Just, I want to clarify, that's not at all in tension with what I was saying. In an environment where the distraction of the technology is constantly present, students will sustain their attention less. I'm distinguishing the ability, sort of the underlying cognitive infrastructure from the behavior in the environment.
Right. And I can just double down on that by saying, like, we have low tech classrooms with high functioning behavior management where you really see kids totally focused, as if it were 30 years ago, right? Or 50 years ago. I think, to Marty's point, that can give you a lot of hope. I do think we can get there. But there's a whole host of factors that are leading to distraction. And I think chief among them is the presence of technology.
Alex, one of the things that gives me a little bit of misgiving. I mean, on the one hand, I'm a ed tech skeptic. On the other hand, you and I have been in some presentations together and seen some pretty compelling AI applications in terms of giving student feedback and whatnot. And we did a webinar on this as well. How do you think about that in terms of, I want screens? I don't hear you advocating a total ban on screens at EL Haynes.
Yes. It is, first of all, I wish I had an easy answer. Second of all, I think that the truth of the matter here is that the dream would be that we could teach ourselves and our students the ability to use these tools responsibly, and to really leverage their power in support of education. I just think it's so hard to do. And so, in short, what I work on with teachers is really tight classroom routines where, and some of this is incredibly technical, right? Let's say all the students are going to be on computers to do an assignment. Then what we essentially try to create, is a panopticon system. That sounds pretty bad, but I'll elaborate on the point, where it's like, if all the students are on computers, what I want is for all the students to be facing forward such that, and then the teacher to stand in the back of the classroom so that the teacher can see all the screens and the student may not know which screens the teacher is looking at, which dramatically reduces the likelihood that a student is going to scan somewhere else. Or to use a software like GoGuardian that monitors all student pages. Another thing that we might do is really something as technical as implementing what we call a clamshell. So it's like all the students are working on computers. The teacher needs to teach something or make an announcement. If the students aren't fully listening, then the impact of that instructional moment is lost. The power of setting the classroom routine to say, everyone clamshell your computers to about 30 degrees. You're not closing it all the way, you're just clamshelling it to 30 degrees such that the student absolutely could not um, see the device. And that way you can more easily split back and forth between real teaching where kids are focused and they're not looking at computers, and then they open their computer back up and work on it. So I don't think a no tech environment works, but if we're going to have technology, we need to be so attuned to the systems and routines we have to making the technology work in service of us. I don't know if that answers your question about AI specifically, Robert, but more about computer usage in general. I'm happy to talk more about AI if it's helpful.
No, I was thinking, in other words, what are the unintended consequences of going screen-free entirely is what I was thinking of. But
Well,
Ginny,
Robert,
I
you're,
think
you're
you've got
talking
some
about
thoughts on
going screen-free entirely, but I think that most folks would be comfortable with just mostly screen free. I mean, like again, you and I are of an older generation where maybe halfway through high school there was like this newfangled thing called a computer lab, and we'd go to a computer lab and work on our technology assignments, and then we would leave. And these things still exist. This was an option in my younger daughter's K-8 school. They barely used computers on occasion, and they took their map tests on it 3 times a year. They might have worked on some research and writing assignments, but otherwise it wasn't a standard part of their day to have a laptop in their backpack on their desk. And certainly with the growth of classical education and the high demand for it, we recognize that this is possible in schools across the country. It's happening in schools across the country where the laptop is an essential part of the education, where students don't have to find little tasks on their learning management system. Instead of that, there is no laptop. There might be a computer lab down the hall for supplemental tutoring, for testing, for the things that you're talking about, but they're using books and they're writing things and they're learning and focusing deeply. So this is happening already. This is possible, and technology can exist in a school building. It doesn't have to be part of the child's day all day long.
Ginny, you flattered me by saying that we were of a same generation. Just to be clear, that is not the case. Technology in my day was the overhead projector. I don't think I
Yep.
attended school even a single day in a school with a whiteboard. So yeah, but thank you for the for the unintended compliment. Look, we've been kind of dancing around the issue of the rest of the child's day, but let's take it on head on. So I think there's broad agreement that a getting cell phones out of schools is a good thing to do, a no-brainer if you like. But kids are only in school for what, a third of each day. That's lots of time for them to use phones and social media and these other distractors outside of school. How should parents think about cell phone use for their kids at home, and how should schools? What can schools do to bring parents along for this way of thinking? Alex, can you talk about how you communicated with your parents?
Yeah, I think a challenge here, some we really do have to look in the mirror first because we're talking a lot about students and student attention and all these things that students are doing or not doing and the ways in which their attention is fractured. Students are reading full novels, adults aren't reading full novels. I think that one of the challenges in education is one cannot give what one does not have, right? So a teacher could teach math, but if we want the teacher to also teach responsible cell phone usage, do we know that the teacher themselves have responsible cell phone usage?
Hmm.
And often the case is we don't, and I don't, and all the above. So I think with families, it's not just the 2015 results, it's not just that fourth and eighth grade results dipped in reading. It's also, from my understanding, there's data that kindergarten and first and second grade, their scores were even dropping in reading. And guess what? That didn't have anything to do with them using cell phones because they didn't have phones. That was that their families now had cell phones, and Facebook bought Instagram in 2012 and Snapchat in 2013. And families were around a lot less, reading to their kids, talking with their kids, engaging with their kids because they themselves were on the phones. So that's a long way of saying that we as adults need to first somehow have a moment where we realize our own challenges in this. And I'll be honest, I have not yet broached this with families. And what I've been saying to families over and over again is please read with your children at home. We're a middle school. That may feel like it's an elementary school thing, but I want you to read with your kids at home. Have them read to you, read to them. I wish I had an answer on what we've shared with families on phones, but to be honest, I have nothing yet. And I'd be love to hear what other folks think.
Yeah, I'm curious, Marty, after that experience you described with your son in the car coming back from the tournament and being basically hostage, my word, not yours, to his device. Does that inspire you to pick up the phone and call the administration and say, hey, how about a textbook?
Well, I've thought about starting that conversation. Yes, though we're very happy overall with the education that he's receiving. I want to pick up on what Alex said a moment ago, because to some extent, we might think of some of the patterns he pointed to, the declines in achievement for younger students, or even the scores at the fourth grade level, as sort of a weak point for the argument that technology is likely part of the problem. As Alex suggests, kids younger than fourth grade aren't spending a lot of times on phones per se,
They're on
or
iPads.
at least not their own phones. Yeah. But actually, we're seeing the same patterns of declining literacy rates among adults as well over this time period. So I actually think it strengthens the, and adults are obviously not distracted from their learning in schools. They're distracted from using their minds in productive ways. And so I think those patterns actually strengthen the case that technology is a factor here. And they, again, push us in the direction you're taking the conversation, Robert, of how can we think beyond school day cell phone bans to right size the role of technology in our lives. Like Alex, I wish I had better answers than I do in my own parenting about that.
But
Ginny,
am I
Ginny has
correct?
answers.
Okay, well, before we go to Ginny, 'cause I do want to hear her perspective. Marty, I mean, does the research that you've done lead you to believe that if we don't correct the relationship between young people and their devices, that we're going to continue to see these declines?
The future is hard to predict, but yes, that would be my expectation. Look, I think people had how people think about learning loss is interesting. I think a lot of people thought that what would happen when you have the disruption of the pandemic is that when students got back into schools and resumed learning at normal rates, that means that scores would come back up to where they had been prior to the disruption. Well, that's not the way it works. If you get kids back in school at normal rates, those sort of gaps relative to where they would have been would be likely to persist until they complete schooling throughout the rest of their lives. And similarly, a downward trend, we would expect it to continue, not to turn around naturally unless we change our strategy.
Ginny, I didn't mean to pass you by on the parenting question or the parental relationship question. From your perspective, are you seeing good, better, best in terms of implementation and model policies?
I wanted to speak to the issue of outside the school day. Model policies, there's an organization called Fair Play that literally does have a model policy that people can look at that states are using. It does advocate for this bell to bell away for the day, and having that kind of come from the state and then let the districts figure out how to implement that, whether that's a yonder pouch, manila envelopes, keeping the phones in the front office. But that bell to bell has to be put in place. That just seems like a no-brainer. But as far as like the rest of the day and what can be done, I think that I tend to come with props to these AEI discussions, and I just wanted to remind everyone that flip phones still exist. So this is one of the flip phones that I got my older daughter, and she had a flip phone through middle school and until her senior year in high school. My younger daughter just got her first flip phone as a 9th grader. So flip phones exist, as do landlines. So I think that parents need to be talking to each other about what they can be doing differently. They don't have to give their child a smartphone. We have permission now from Anxious Generation and Jonathan Haidt's campaign to do something differently. And schools can make sure that the teachers have read that book, and parent teacher associations, PTAs, PTOs can have discussion groups around that book and maybe change the culture. Try these other technologies. Get your kid off of smartphones. Certainly have the phones in the parent's bedroom at night. It's alarming how much of these high caffeine drinks that teens are drinking just to stay awake because they've stayed up so late. So parents need to collect phones at night. They definitely should not allow children and young teens on social media. And apparently some states are looking at more opportunities to expand their cell phone bans into social media bans. And I think that that's a constructive conversation.
Marty, since you've looked at all of the excellent literature, as far as I know, do we have any kind of fine-grained, useful distinctions to be made yet about the kinds of policies that are more effective than others? Outright bans, yonder pouches, digital literacy programs. Do we have any insight into what's more likely to be effective here than not?
Really, the first evidence that we got along those lines came from the Angela Duckworth Phones in Focus study, which is in its earliest stages. It's a very ambitious project trying to get survey responses from 100,000 or more educators, giving them information on the type of ban in place, the type of distinctions that you were just making, Robert, from collecting phones at the front door, having them stored in lockers, versus just having them in students' bags and not visible. And what she was able to say just this week, as I understand it, is that teachers have a more favorable response to the stricter implementations, the yonder pouches, the taking them away at the front door. Whether that translates into differences in student learning, I don't think we have hard evidence that that's the case, but I think they're Robert, you mentioned a reason earlier, which as a former teacher, you don't want to be the bad guy. I can't think of a good reason not to try and centralize the decision making of this over this. I mean, there are a lot of aspects of policy and practice around technology that create collective action problems, right? Ginny, you just talked about one, parents should be talking to one another. One of the things I've appreciated about Jonathan Haidt's writing on this is that he really points to how there's this collective action problem among parents. If social life among a peer group shifts to online settings, then you're, as a parent, faced with this decision to basically ostracize your child or give in to their desire to be part of that via device. And that takes coordination. I would think that schools could play a role in trying to shift some of those norms and helping to coordinate. But that's also the case among teachers in the same building. It's going to be very hard for one teacher to lead the charge on this challenge. It's a lot easier for a principal to say, here's how we're doing things in our school.
We're going to go to audience questions in a moment, but before we do, one question for each of you to answer, if you like. 5 years from now, what would a healthy digital culture look like in schools? Who wants to throw themselves on that grenade? Go ahead, Alex.
Thanks, Robert. I appreciate that. Focusing on the positives for a moment. One of the biggest gifts that education and technology and AI could give us is if we could get truly more personalized learning that does tailor to student interests and things like that. And so I think a healthy digital culture 5 years from now would feature real clarity when it's like there are these parts of the day when you're going to be on the computer, ideally on a lockdown browser, where you are getting content and tutoring that is tailored to your interests and exactly what you need. And that's good. That is a good harnessing of AI and technology and computer and all the above. And there could be these parts of the day you want to be low to no, and you are truly sitting with a book. And I think so much of education is about creating a model vision of what society and life can be like. And so we want to implicitly, but also overtly communicate to kids. There are times in your life where you're going to have technology in your computer and maybe even your phone, and you've got to deal with that. You are going to go to college and be alone in your dorm room. What are you going to do? And we at school are going to expose you to that, and you are going to demonstrate and build your capacity. And then there are going to be these times where you've got to fully put the tech away and really fall deeply in love with a book with nothing else around you. And we at school want to expose you to both. So I think to me, that healthy culture would involve both parts, and not an implicit, but an explicit explanation from administrators and educators and parents that both of these things feature in the school day because they both feature in your life, and you have to be able to do both well.
Well said. Ginny?
I I would love to see device-free classrooms, and let's go back to that technology lab, that computer lab down the hall. I'd love to see students learning deeply from books and just going back to pencil and paper. And what I'm describing is something that, again, my younger daughter had at her K-8 school. So this is something that exists now and I think should exist in a more widespread way. And we should fall out of love with this idea of signing expensive ed tech contracts and continuing to maintain what we built up during the pandemic. Again, because all these school districts had all of this federal money that they had to spend. Let's get ourselves unhooked from the devices and go back to deep and focused learning.
Marty West, what does a healthy digital culture look like in 5 years' time?
Well, I agree with every word that Alex and Ginny just said and find it hard to add much to their responses. But maybe I'll just suggest one principle for thinking about technology use in schools, which is that students, if they're on a device, should be on a device that has been optimized to a specific learning challenge. So there could be a software within a laptop that has been set up in the way Alex described to be able to lock down browsers, but it would never be a cell phone. A cell phone has not been optimized for learning. There may be some learning that you can do on it, but there are too many other things. And in no case is that phone the optimal way to engage with technology in order to engage in a learning task. And so, that's how we should be using devices that have been optimized to tasks or problems that we don't know how to solve in other ways. And that's going to be a more limited set of applications.
First audience question is intriguing to me simply because I cannot conceive of a good answer, but you all are smarter than I am, so I'm going to offer it up to you. Should phone bans be part of a broader package of reforms designed to improve students' cognitive load? I assume that means academic performance. If so, what are other policies that could work in concert with the bans?
We were talking before we started about memorization, Robert. In a faith-based school, you have to memorize a Bible verse each week, but if it's not a faith-based school, you memorize a poem. I would say if we're talking about strengthening ability to manage a cognitive load, memorization, bringing that back would be helpful.
Okay, good answer.
Yeah, my mind went in the same basic direction. I will say we should probably get a better sense of what the questioner means by cognitive load. We often think about cognitive load as sort of the information that a student needs to carry in their mind as they sort of are answering a problem. And memorization is one of the strategies that we try and use in order to lessen the cognitive load that students are experiencing. So making sure that students really learn their times tables so that when they need them in the midst of a much more challenging math question, they don't have to devote a bunch of their bandwidth to trying to address
Yeah.
that part that's really a distraction from the core learning goal. I think based on the research that I've seen, I think we should be wary of concerted efforts to try and say engage in mental training to try to boost working memory capacity or the like, some of these underlying cognitive abilities. There's not a lot of evidence that we can reliably do that. But I think there are strategies like mastery of facts, which people often say we don't need in a world where students always have a cell phone nearby, that actually could be part of a better effort to allow students to be successful.
You're reminding me, Marty, of an article written by my dear friend and mentor Edie Hirsch Jr. 25 years ago, which I believe it was in the American Educator, and it had the title "You Can Always Look It Up, Can't You?" or something to that effect. This was one of the arguments that helped make the path straight for devices into classrooms, was this idea that you didn't need to know stuff, that you had all the world's knowledge at your fingertips. As we know, that's a bit of a canard. You can only use these tools as well as the information that you possess. So I think perhaps that's what the questioner had in mind. Boy, here's a provocative question. What role, if any, has lobbying from tech companies contributed to resistance to school cell phone bans? I don't know the answer to that.
I would say they always are a couple steps ahead. If you look at all of the partnerships that AI techno companies have when it comes to AI with teachers unions, both NEA and the AFT, they're just figuring out other ways to make sure that tech is an active part of classrooms.
This may be a slightly unfair question, so I will not be upset with you if any of you want to take a pass. But one of our audience members asked, how are the panelists treating cell phones in their own homes?
Yeah, I mentioned my daughter's not getting smartphones. Just the older one is 17, and then she got hers. I would say I have an unhealthy relationship with my cell phone, so I'll admit to that. So I'm doing great as a parent, not great for myself, though.
And I would say I have even more room for improvement. So Alex, maybe you can be the inspiring exemplar.
Yeah. Oh no, I would say I'm getting smashed over here, and I think that there are a couple things that are really relevant. One is the brightest minds in America are now being leveraged to sell advertising via Facebook and Instagram, trying to optimize advertising and becoming merchants on our attention. And I think before phones, that we searched for content. And we would go out looking for content. We'd type in a question and then look for content. But now content searches for us. The algorithms know what we want, and the content is shared with us based on what we need. And so I think if we're going to solve this for education, we have to find a way to solve this for ourselves. And I don't have a solution to that yet. This may be too philosophical, but I think such a big part of education and maturation and human development is that when kids are born and are young, I taught preschool originally, they're the definition of egocentric, and they can only see the world through their lens. And everyone else is an abstraction to them. And so much of education is about saying there are other preferences and things that you can't immediately see that are interesting and good, and they'll take work and they'll be unpleasant, but they'll have this payoff. And so much of education is about building the case for that toward the ultimate edification for us as human beings. And phones and all this technology really works in opposition to that, to say, we're going to keep I send you what you want at all times, and you can customize the device so that it is fully underscoring this feeling that you have that you are the center of the universe, and that the YouTube that you look at is the same YouTube. That's YouTube. No, that's just your YouTube. It's not anyone else's. And so that's a long way of saying I just worry that, again, until we've sort of fixed some of this as adults in our own lives, as the question is getting at, it's just going to be really hard to fix it for kids.
Yeah. I love this question. How angry should we be at early 2010s ed tech companies for their lack of foresight? And given the poor outcomes from introducing phones and computers into schools, how skeptical should we be in general of such optimists?
I think the ed tech companies are gonna ed tech. Like it's a you know
Yep.
multi-billion-dollar industry, and like I said, it's a bit of a whack-a-mole. We might be restricting phones, but they're working on the AI and other endeavors. What we should be angry about are people who in the K-12 system who chase trends, whatever the trend is. And if it was, oh my gosh, this one-to-one device trend, this is going to be fabulous, without thinking it through, we should be angry about that, and we should look to where else are they seeing trends and not thinking it through, and then not being willing to back up when they've realized they've made a mistake.
Yep. I'm not hearing a lot of discussion of digital natives lately. Now that we bring it up, Marty, I think this is the paper you alluded to in your presentation, but we have this question. According to a new working paper from David Figlio, Florida's cell phone ban increased student test scores in a large urban district by about 1 percentile. Or 1 point. The specific question is, how meaningful do you consider a change of that magnitude?
Well, so I will say that study was published this morning, and it's a working paper. So I have not had time to digest it fully. My understanding was that it was not about a single district, but rather about districts statewide, comparing those that put bans in place to those that did not, and that 1 percentile point was at the very bottom of the range of results that they sort of estimated. Look, and that they only showed up in the second year. He also shows in that paper in the first year that disciplinary referrals went up, and they went up specifically for Black students in the schools with bans. So this isn't going to be easy. There are going to be challenges. You're going to have to figure out how you handle violations of policies. But I think seeing a modest positive improvement in a very summary measure of knowledge and skills, which is a state test score, in a relatively short period of time after just 2 years with a ban in place, is worth paying attention to. I would also say I think there may be other reasons to consider these policies, even if they don't show up as a major driver of state test scores. But we set up the presentation in that way. In part, I did, linked to test scores, so it's a fair question to ask.
Yeah, to make a stock market analogy, and when in a bear market, flat or slightly up is a good thing, right? Okay, we're almost at time, so last question. We'll go Alex, Ginny, and then conclude with Marty. Given this conversation, what would you like policymakers and parents to take away from the research that Marty talked about and our conversation today? Alex?
I think I would love for policymakers and families to, so often school becomes the place where the rubber meets the road and where the policy has to be implemented. And I think to the extent that we can all be rowing in the same direction and the policymakers can say something like, okay, we're going to have a ban. Let me give you a bunch of ideas on how to implement that plan and the relative merits of those different plans, I think would be really helpful. And for families to say, okay, if there is a ban in place, what would it look like for me at home to support that? And what will need to change about my own home policy around phones and things like that? I think those are both key takeaways for me.
Ginny?
I would say key takeaways would be that this is urgent. Don't slowly implement these policies or just start with the younger grades. Just do it. Cell phone bans, bell to bell, away for the day. I'd say that this can help. The evidence from Florida and the Duckworth analysis shows that this can help. And then I'd say that EdTech continues to distract, and we're not done.
Marty, you get the last word.
So I'll just offer one reflection based on my experience of some of the conversations around cell phone bans here in Massachusetts, where I'm on the State Board of Education. There's been a lot of attention to specific sets of students for whom cell phones are actually essential learning aids or even physical health aids because of glucose monitoring and the like in school settings. And those legitimate benefits have been used to argue against more comprehensive bans, even with exceptions carved out. There's student privacy involved. I think there are risks in this area of letting exceptions instead of proving the rule, eating the rule, and that we should avoid that and make sure that we, don't let that happen.
That is all the time we have for this afternoon. I want to thank my AEI colleague, Greg.Fournier, for producing this webinar, and thank our guests, Alex Barron, Ginny Gentles, and Marty West. We will be back again next month, where we will be discussing how to make the field of education a more evidence-based profession. Look forward to that program announcement in your email inboxes in the coming days. Thanks again to everybody, and thanks to our audience. We'll see you next month.